When we speak about Carl Jung's psychology, one of the most fascinating applications lies in understanding how women shaped by narcissistic parents develop their personalities. Jung believed that the psyche carries hidden patterns, what he called archetypes, and that our early relationships strongly affect how these patterns emerge. For daughters of narcissistic parents, these influences are often profound and unusual. A narcissistic parent typically demands admiration, obedience, or perfection, rather than offering unconditional love. For a daughter, this means her sense of identity is often shaped around the need to please, rather than the freedom to discover her authentic self. In Jungian terms, her persona, the mask she shows the world, becomes extremely polished. She may appear competent, charming, and endlessly giving. But beneath this mask, her deeper self often remains hidden, longing to be recognized. This duality creates unusual traits that make these women both remarkably strong and secretly vulnerable. On the outside, they may display high levels of empathy, responsibility, and creativity. They learn early how to read a room, anticipate the moods of others, and adjust themselves to keep harmony. Yet, on the inside, they may feel a constant emptiness, unsure of who they truly are when no one else is watching. Jung would see this as a disconnection from individuation, the process of becoming one's authentic self. Instead of moving toward wholeness, these daughters risk being trapped in an endless cycle of meeting others' needs, while their own inner voice grows faint. But it is precisely in this struggle that we see their unusual traits, the qualities that set them apart from others. Some may channel this into extraordinary achievements. Others may appear deeply intuitive, almost psychic, because they were trained from childhood to sense the emotions of their parents, and many develop a profound longing for meaning, searching for spiritual or creative outlets that allow them to express what was never safe to show in their family. This journey, while difficult, also carries the seeds of transformation. Jung taught that the shadow, the hidden and rejected parts of ourselves, holds our potential for growth. For daughters of narcissistic parents, the shadow may contain not only pain, but also immense resilience and creativity. By learning to confront and integrate these hidden parts, they can move from merely surviving to living authentically. Before we continue exploring the specific unusual traits and their Jungian roots, make sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next deep dive into psychology and healing. One of the most striking traits often seen in daughters of narcissistic parents is hyper-attunement to others. From a Jungian perspective, this develops because the child's psyche adapts to survive in an environment where the parent's emotional state is unpredictable. Imagine a young girl constantly scanning her mother or father's face, tone of voice and body language, learning how to predict moods in order to avoid criticism or rejection. Over time, this creates a heightened sensitivity to other people's emotions. In Jung's language, this is an inflation of the feeling function. The daughter becomes so finely tuned to others that her own emotions are often sacrificed. She may feel responsible for keeping peace, smoothing conflicts, or even carrying her parents' emotional burdens. Later in life, this shows up as exceptional empathy. Friends may call her a natural therapist, or the one who always understands. Yet, on the inside, she may struggle to identify what she herself feels. Another unusual trait is the tendency to overachieve or overgive. Because love in her childhood felt conditional, tied to performance or compliance, she learns to equate worth with doing rather than being. This can produce remarkable results. Many such women excel academically, professionally, or artistically. However, Jung would warn that this reflects a one-sided development of the persona. Instead of expressing her true self, she may be trapped in roles of caretaker, achiever, or perfectionist, while her inner needs remain neglected. We also see the emergence of what Jung called the wounded animus, the internal masculine energy. In daughters of narcissistic parents, the animus may develop as either overly critical or deeply insecure. She might hear an inner voice that constantly tells her she's not enough, or that she must always strive harder. This inner critic mirrors the narcissistic parent's voice and can dominate her inner life until she learns to differentiate it from her true self. On the flip side, these experiences often lead to an unusual depth of imagination and creativity. Jung observed that the psyche compensates for what is missing in conscious life by providing images and symbols in the unconscious. A daughter who could not express her authentic self outwardly may express it inwardly through dreams, art, writing, or even spiritual exploration. In these creative outlets, the buried aspects of her soul begin to find a voice. It is essential to understand that these traits are not simply weaknesses. They are adaptations, survival strategies that reveal incredible resilience. What looks like hypersensitivity can become deep intuition. What feels like overachievement can become discipline and ambition. What begins as shadow often holds the raw material for individuation, the lifelong journey toward wholeness that Jung described. Another unusual trait we often find in daughters of narcissistic parents is the development of a fragmented self-image. Jung spoke about the importance of the self as the organizing center of the psyche. But in these women, the self is often hidden beneath layers of what the parent demanded. Instead of growing up with a stable sense of I am, she learns, I am who you need me to be. This can create an identity that feels fluid, sometimes even chameleon-like. She may excel in adapting to any social group, workplace, or relationship, blending in with ease. While this adaptability can be an asset, it also means she may feel like she has no firm ground to stand on. The question, who am I really, can become a haunting theme throughout her life. In Jungian terms, this reflects a disruption in the individuation process. Individuation is not about becoming perfect. It is about becoming whole. But when early life requires a daughter to silence parts of herself to survive, individuation is delayed. Instead of integrating her shadow, her rejected feelings and desires, she learns to exile them, creating an inner split. Another fascinating pattern is her relationship to the shadow of anger. Because narcissistic parents often punish expressions of anger, many daughters grow up repressing this emotion entirely. On the surface, they may appear endlessly kind, patient, and agreeable. But beneath the surface, the shadow carries unexpressed rage. This can show up as passive aggression, sudden emotional outbursts, or even physical symptoms like fatigue or tension. Jung would say this repressed anger is not inherently destructive. It is raw energy, trapped in the unconscious, waiting to be integrated. When brought into awareness, it can transform into assertiveness, boundaries, and a powerful drive for justice. Many women who heal from narcissistic parenting find that once they reconnect with their anger, they also reconnect with their life force. A third unusual trait is the search for external validation. Growing up, approval was often inconsistent or conditional. As adults, these daughters may look for affirmation from partners, friends, or even strangers to reassure them of their worth. They may struggle with people-pleasing or find it difficult to say no. Jung's concept of the anima and animus dialogue helps here. The inner masculine voice that criticizes must be balanced by a nurturing feminine voice that affirms. Learning to cultivate this inner balance becomes a path towards self-validation. Finally, these women often carry a deep longing for authenticity. They may not always know how to reach it, but their psyche pushes them toward healing, whether through therapy, spirituality, or creative expression. Jung would call this the pull of the self, the inner drive toward wholeness that never disappears, no matter how buried it becomes. One of the most paradoxical traits of daughters raised by narcissistic parents is their strength hidden within vulnerability. On the outside, they often appear highly functional, managing careers, relationships, and responsibilities with determination. Yet internally, they may feel fragile, doubting themselves at every step. Jung would describe this as a tension between the persona and the shadow. The persona presents strength, while the shadow holds the wounds of childhood that never had the chance to be fully acknowledged. This inner tension often makes them unusually self-reflective. Unlike many people who go through life without questioning their motives or patterns, these daughters frequently examine their own thoughts and feelings with great intensity. In Jungian psychology, this reflects the activation of the inner world of the unconscious. Pain forces them to look inward, where they may discover symbolic dreams, powerful intuitions, or archetypal patterns guiding their growth. Another unusual trait is the presence of heightened empathy mixed with self-neglect. Because their parents' needs always took priority, many daughters grow into women who instinctively put others first. They can become remarkable caregivers, friends, or partners, offering deep understanding and compassion. However, this often comes at the cost of ignoring their own needs. Jung would see this as an imbalance in the psyche, where the archetype of the caregiver dominates, while the archetype of the warrior or sovereign remains underdeveloped. This imbalance also plays out in relationships. Daughters of narcissistic parents may be drawn to partners who replicate the dynamics of their childhood. They might unconsciously choose relationships where they give endlessly, but receive little in return, or where their identity is overshadowed by someone else's. From a Jungian perspective, this is the repetition of an archetypal pattern. The psyche recreates familiar dynamics in the hope of eventually transcending them. And yet, within this struggle lies their potential for profound transformation. Once they begin to recognize these patterns, they often develop extraordinary inner wisdom. Jung believed that the psyche naturally seeks healing, and for these women, the very traits that caused suffering can become gifts. Their sensitivity can evolve into intuition, their self-doubt into humility, and their longing for meaning into a spiritual journey. It is important to remember that Jung saw healing not as eliminating wounds, but as integrating them. The goal is not to erase the past, but to allow the wounded child within to become part of the whole self. For daughters of narcissistic parents, individuation means reclaiming the parts of themselves that were silenced: anger, joy, creativity, and authentic voice, and weaving them into a stronger, more complete identity. One of the most empowering insights Jungian psychology offers is that what begins as a wound can later serve as a source of transformation. For daughters of narcissistic parents, the unusual traits they develop in childhood often carry within them the seeds of strength. Take, for example, the trait of hypervigilance, constantly scanning others' moods to avoid conflict. While this begins as a survival strategy, over time it can evolve into extraordinary intuition. Many of these women report sensing things about people that others completely miss: subtle shifts in tone, hidden emotions, or unspoken needs. When healed, this ability becomes less about fear and more about genuine connection and insight. Another trait is their capacity for resilience. Childhood in a narcissistic household can feel like walking a tightrope every day, balancing love and rejection, approval and criticism. By adulthood, many daughters discover that they are remarkably capable of handling challenges. What once felt like instability transforms into adaptability. In Jung's terms, this is the integration of the shadow, turning the dark experiences of childhood into strengths that fuel growth and wisdom. We also see in them a deep yearning for authenticity. While some people are content living on the surface, these women often feel compelled to dig deeper. Their experiences teach them that appearances can be deceptive, so they are naturally drawn to truth, meaning, and self-discovery. Jung called this pull toward wholeness the call of the self, the inner compass that directs us toward our fullest potential. This yearning often drives them toward therapy, spiritual practice, or creative expression. Whether through journaling, painting, writing, or exploring dreams, they seek ways to reconnect with the parts of themselves that were silenced, and in doing so, they often unlock talents and depths of creativity that surprise even themselves. At this stage, it's important to highlight another Jungian insight. Healing is not about rejecting the past, but transforming it. The daughter of a narcissistic parent does not need to erase her history. Instead, she learns to carry it differently, seeing her pain not only as suffering, but as a guide. The parts of her that were once hidden in the shadow become sources of power when brought into the light of awareness. If you've related to what we've explored so far, remember, you are not alone, and this journey toward authenticity is possible. And before we dive into the final unusual traits and how they shape the individuation process, make sure to subscribe to the channel so you can continue uncovering these powerful insights with us. As we reach the final stage of this exploration, let's look at one of the most profound unusual traits daughters of narcissistic parents often embody: a spiritual hunger for wholeness. Jung believed that the human psyche is not only psychological, but also deeply spiritual, and that trauma often awakens the soul's longing to reconnect with something greater than the ego. For these daughters, the wounds of childhood become the catalyst for a quest. They may be drawn to depth psychology, meditation, philosophy, or creative practices that help them bridge the gap between their outer persona and their inner self. Unlike many who avoid introspection, these women often feel compelled to face the shadow directly. They seek meaning because they know what it feels like to live without it. Another unusual trait is the development of boundaries as a late-blooming gift. Early on, boundaries were nearly impossible. They were trained to prioritize the parents' needs above their own. But as they mature and awaken to their patterns, many discover the power of saying no. And with every boundary set, they reclaim a piece of themselves that was once lost. Jung would describe this as the integration of opposites, the movement toward individuation, where light and shadow, giving and receiving, strength and vulnerability, all find their rightful place. We must also recognize their capacity to break generational patterns. Jung often wrote about the collective unconscious, the inherited patterns passed down through families and cultures. Daughters of narcissistic parents, once they begin healing, often become the ones who say, "This cycle stops with me." They may parent differently, love differently, or live with a conscious awareness that transforms not only their own life, but the lives of those around them. Finally, one of the most unusual and beautiful traits is the ability to turn suffering into wisdom. The very experiences that wounded them also make them uniquely capable of understanding the struggles of others. Many become therapists, healers, artists, or mentors, using their journey not just to heal themselves, but to light the way for others. This is the essence of Jung's individuation process, not perfection, but authenticity, not denial of wounds, but transformation through them. If you are a daughter of narcissistic parents, remember this: your traits are not flaws. They are the marks of survival, and within them lie extraordinary gifts waiting to be claimed. Your journey toward individuation is not just about healing the past. It is about becoming fully yourself, perhaps for the first time.